Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 500 library systems across the US, Canada, and New Zealand with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator in conversation with each of the acclaimed authors that you will hear from throughout our series. Today, we are so honored to have psychologist and author Dr. David H. Rosmarin with us to talk about his book, Thriving with Anxiety, 9 Tools to Make Your Anxiety Work for You. Before we jump in, I want to give you all that standard housekeeping information that keeps everything running smoothly, and then we'll turn things over to Dr. Rosmarin. So we have compiled some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, but we welcome you to submit questions during the presentation by clicking that questions button that's just below the live stream video. There are quite a few of you tuning in today, and so we will take as many questions as we can during that Q&A period. As a reminder, there is going to be a link sent out to you for the recording in about 24 hours. So if you have to leave early for any reason, don't worry about that. Now, what if I told you that learning to work with anxiety instead of fighting it could be the key to unlocking your greatest potential? Today, Dr. Rosmarin, a Harvard Medical School professor, clinical psychologist, and the author of Thriving with Anxiety, is going to talk to you. He'll challenge everything we think we know about anxiety and offer practical tools to turn it from a burden to a benefit. Just a little bit more about Dr. Rosmarin. He's also the founder of the Center for Anxiety. He and his team have treated more than 10,000 patients and published more than 100 research articles on mental health. His work has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Good Morning America, and TEDx. So I would like to now welcome Dr. Rosmarin. I'm going to turn things over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Brandon. Really appreciate that wonderful introduction and everything you're doing to make this and other programs available to a broad audience. I'm going to share my screen, so let me know if that works. Window, there we go. Okay. How's that look, Brandon?
That looks good.
Great, because I was anxious. It's a bit ironic to be speaking about anxiety to a library group, because what's the most stressful or anxiety thing that you bump into in a library, right? Maybe overdue fines, maybe someone being a little bit loud. But in all seriousness, anxiety shows up everywhere, literally everywhere today, even in the library. And what I'd like to explore is really what Brandon mentioned. What if it's not a flaw? What if it's not a disease? What if it's a human emotion? What if it's something that we all experience? It's actually a part of humanity. And what if, since it's just a part of humanity, what if it can be used to help us to thrive, to help us to flourish, to make our lives more connected, more meaningful, more productive, just better? So these ideas that I'm going to present to you today, they are based on my book. They are also based on a TEDx talk that I gave, which is now found on TED.com. You can actually scan that QR code. So if at any point during this talk I get boring, just flip over to YouTube, check it out, or you can bookmark it and see it later. I hope you will. And you can also get in touch with me and let me know your thoughts. In order to orient our conversation today, I wanted to start with a question. And I'm turning this over to you. So please scan this QR code now and respond. It's totally anonymous. You won't be able to be tracked. And your responses will appear on the screen, but obviously not with your name or any identifying information. And the question I want to ask you is this: do you feel overwhelmed by the state of the world today? Responses are coming in, and it's pretty clear which horse is winning this race. We have responses from 500 people at this point, and numbers are still coming in and still going up. Pretty amazing to see. Only 2% saying no. Only 4% saying rarely. And basically two-thirds saying yes frequently, the top anchor on the 4-point scale, and 1/3 saying yes sometimes, which is also in the affirmative. Now, I am actually most concerned on this screen by the people who said no. Because if you don't feel overwhelmed by the state of the world right now, then that's an indication that something is wrong. Personally, I certainly have felt overwhelmed. Sometimes, somewhere between sometimes and frequently. And if you look at what's going on, here is just a couple of major world events over the past 5 years. And I haven't even included 2025. It takes us from the COVID pandemic to the Capitol riots, to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the AI boom and all sorts of concerns, unrest in the Middle East, and the US presidential election. If you step back and look at the world, my thesis is as follows. The problem is not that we experience anxiety. The problem is that we've been taught to fear a basic aspect of our humanity. We need to level set, and we have to understand that when people have stress, when the world is experiencing unrest, we will have heart palpitations, shortness of breath, muscle tension, difficulty catching our breath, difficulty sleeping at night. We're going to experience those symptoms. We're wired for that, and it's not a bad thing. Once we have accepted, once we've done that level set and understood that anxiety is part of the human condition, I experience it, you experience it, everyone you know experiences it, except for a couple people on the last screen. And those people, again, I'm most concerned about. In fact, of all the people who have to reach out to me, it's them. It's you who said no. Once we've accepted that anxiety is part of the landscape of being human, we can unleash its power to drive connection, to drive awareness, self-awareness, to drive being human, and actually to drive creativity. And my goal today is to turn everything you know about anxiety on its head by framing it as an emotion, not a disorder. And more important, give you a 4-step process in how to turn anxiety from your enemy into your ally. I want to tell you how I came to these conclusions. It's a pretty crazy story. At the start of the pandemic, I got very, very anxious. My Center for Anxiety, which is a clinic that I founded, which has offices in New York and Boston, had at that time about 500 active clients and about 25 active staff. And I was very nervous that these individuals who were under my care, who were experiencing anxiety, clinical anxiety, anxiety disorders prior to the pandemic, were going into this very difficult period of uncertainty, economic uncertainty, health uncertainty, social uncertainty, with all of the vicissitudes of that era, the isolation, just the difficulty dealing with the realities of the time. And every time I glanced at my phone, it made me panic because I was wondering, is this going to be one of the clients who's, maybe become suicidal or something's gone wrong with one of my clinicians? And it was a very anxious and difficult time. because I didn't know what was going to happen. 2 or 3 months into the pandemic, I turned around and I was really amazed, quite flabbergasted. Now, my immediate response was to get busy. We rallied the troops. We figured out how to pivot everything to telehealth in just 2 weeks. But a couple months later, I turned back and I said, you know what I'm observing is that our clients who had anxiety disorders going into the pandemic and who were arguably the highest risk for having significant, substantial, debilitating anxiety during that period were actually doing quite well. So I turned to my colleagues and I said, are you seeing the same? And they said, yes. And I emailed many colleagues in other centers, in other cities, in other countries even. And they told me the same thing. The same story was emerging, that clients who were receiving professional psychotherapy with anxiety disorders, for anxiety disorders prior to the pandemic, were actually doing fairly well in May, June, and July of 2020. So I wrote an article about it for Prevention Magazine. I wanted to be a little cheeky, so I entitled it The Blessing of an Anxiety Disorder, and it contained my initial observations that clients who had an anxiety disorder prior to the pandemic were actually blessed because they came in and they dealt with it and they got the skills and the tools that they needed. And therefore, once the pandemic hit, they actually knew what to do. They had a different perspective on anxiety. They had a different toolkit. They knew how to turn this into something to thrive. People who had never had anxiety disorders before, though, they did not have those tools. They did not have those skills. So when they came into the pandemic in March and April of 2020, they were sitting ducks. And we all know what happened to anxiety and depression during that period. In the general population, it spiked by some estimates by 25% more among adults and 50% more among young adults and adolescents, but not for individuals who had anxiety disorders. I did not expect that I would receive over 100 emails from around the world, from patients, from clients saying the same thing. Hey, I had an anxiety disorder and I went into the pandemic and I knew what to do and everyone around me was crumbling, but I actually knew what to do. And I'm feeling better now than I ever have. Pouring in of information. So after the pandemic was done last year, I shouldn't say done, but after we had dug ourselves out, I teamed up with my wonderful colleague, Dr. Stephen Pirotinsky in New York. And we looked at the data from Center for Anxiety, and I couldn't believe what I saw. In brief, clients who came in prior to March 2020 did not have an increase in anxiety at any point between March and December of 2020. This is an astounding finding with 764 clients presenting to Center for Anxiety over the course of the entirety of the year of 2020. That individuals with pre-existing anxiety disorders, scientifically, empirically, as a group, did not have an uptick in anxiety during one of the most stressful and difficult periods in recent human history. Among pre-pandemic patients, there was not an increase in anxiety during the pandemic's acute phase. And we published this in a journal called Plus One. It's actually open access, and you can look it up and take a look on your phone anytime you like. That experience, going through the pandemic, feeling anxious myself, having it help me to rally, to become more of a clinical leader within my office, going through the experience of panicking myself and then realizing that my patients who had anxiety actually could use that as a catalyst to growth, it turned everything about anxiety on its head for me. Because I had been taught that it's a disorder, it's a disease always, and it's always a problem, and it's something we have to reduce, it's something we have to get rid of, it's not something that's compatible with healthy living. And after this experience over the last really 5 years, I've been on a different track. And I stepped back and I realized that many great leaders in the world have experienced anxiety, and because of their anxiety, they became great. Because of their anxiety, they became great. I'll start with Sir Winston Churchill, who's on the left side of your screen. I found an amazing anecdote that early in his career, the first time he stood up in the House of Commons in London to make a speech as a politician, He froze for 3 full minutes. 3 full minutes. He couldn't speak because he was so anxious. And after that experience, he said, I'm not going to let anxiety get in my way. And he practiced and he pushed and he focused his energies towards conquering that anxiety. And as a result, it made him not just into an unanxious or not stressed out speaker. It made him into one of the greatest orators of the 20th century, somebody who led the free world, the UK certainly, through the Second World War. Oprah Winfrey has a similar story, although a little different. In the 1990s, she had a box office flop. One of her movies did not do well, I think the only one ever. And she turned to food. She became emotionally numb and at one point ate 30 pounds of macaroni and cheese. And in her state of anxiety, at some point, she said, you know what? I can't control everything. And she let go. Once she did that, she turned around and said, I'm going to focus my efforts on what I can, and I'm going to let go of the rest. She became a media icon using that philosophy, which she keeps to this day, to this very day. She's somebody who puts in her greatest effort, and then she lets go. Amazingly, I think it's one of the secrets to her success. And she learned it during a period of anxiety. And finally, speaking of icons, Taylor Swift, the first time she sang the national anthem at a football game, she couldn't get up to speak. She couldn't get up to sing. And what she ended up doing was sharing her feelings with her friends, with her colleagues, with her family, and most of all with her fans. She speaks about anxiety all the time in her songs. Her lyrics reference it. And now, well, she can shake it off. To be very clear, sometimes anxiety, it interferes with your life. And that's called clinical anxiety. Clinical anxiety. And yes, clinical anxiety is and can be a disorder. But that's when it interferes. You can't go to school, you can't go to work, you can't do what you need to do. When we have clinical anxiety, we need professional help, whether that's medication or whether that's psychotherapy. But other times, many, many times, I would say most of the time, anxiety, it's uncomfortable. But it doesn't disrupt our day-to-day. You know, if you look back, people are experiencing higher levels of clinical anxiety. The second leading cause of death today is suicide. There are actually more suicides than homicides. Second leading cause of death for young people under age 35, I should say. If you also look at self-injury, people are injuring themselves, harming themselves. Today, even pre-teenagers, ages 10, 11, 12, tender ages, are harming themselves by cutting or burning. Some estimates are 1 in 20 preteens, 5%, and up to 25% of college students. It's also one of the number one reasons why people go on disability today is anxiety and depression. So I'm not undermining that anxiety can be debilitating. It can be. I've worked in clinical psychology, in acute psychiatry for 20 years. I know the realities, and I'm not whitewashing this. But I want to contrast that with something else. In middle-income countries, like Brazil and Mexico, there's half as much anxiety as we have in the United States. And get this, in low-income countries like Colombia and Peru, where this young woman is from, there is half as much anxiety as we have in middle-income countries, which means that this girl who lives in a Peruvian village that does not have running water, she is 25% as likely as her same aged friend living in the United States who has an iPhone, who comes home to HVAC, has multiple bathrooms, drives on engineered surfaces to and from school. That American kid is 4 times as likely to have an anxiety disorder compared to this young girl. By the way, take a look at her smile. I hate to ask this question, but when's the last time you saw a 6-year-old American child smile like that? Now, if you're wondering what on earth is going on, why would it be that countries with malnutrition and less security and less financial stability have decreased risk for anxiety compared to the United States, which has the highest prevalence and severity of mental disorders in the history of mankind. To put it differently, why are the most privileged people ever to walk planet Earth also the most anxious? And I think it comes down to this. This is our approach when we feel anxious. We try to erase it. We try to remove it from our lives. We try to squelch it and distance ourselves from it. We pretend it's not there. Our first reaction is to get rid of it. We reduce the discomfort. We don't embrace it. We become more insular and we hide our feelings as opposed to sharing it. We try to increase our certainty. We try to increase our control instead of letting go. And all of that sends us into a cycle, a negative cycle. Because the more we try to erase anxiety, the worse it gets. If we think immediately when you feel anxious, I shouldn't be feeling this way. These feelings are something I need to be afraid of. Physiologically, that will increase your level of adrenaline. Adrenaline goes up when we perceive a threat. So if anxiety is perceived as a threat, the moment you feel anxious, your adrenaline will increase and your anxiety will compound. This cycle of having initial anxiety, interpreting that as a failure, interpreting that something's wrong, and then having an adrenaline dump, which increases our heart rate and our breathing rate and our muscle tension and our stomach upset, takes us down a cycle, which is creating a cascade of mental distress. And that result, I believe, is the main reason we feel anxious today. Why our society, as opposed to others, is so bent on, is in such stress. It's because we are so bent on getting rid of our anxiety. That young woman in Peru, she doesn't expect to be in control. She doesn't judge herself when she feels anxious or stressed. She knows that it's because there's political unrest. It's because there's a real threat. It's because she's at risk for malnutrition. So she doesn't judge herself. She understands that anxiety is part of life. And then she uses it to connect with her friends, to connect with her family, to live the best life she can. And she's happier for it. Now, I want to make something very clear about medication. In rich countries, citizens tend to immediately reach for pharmacological and medication interventions in order to relieve their distress, as opposed to accepting that some degree of anxiety is part of the puzzle, it's part of the picture, and then learning to use it in an appropriate way. Now, I want to be very clear. I am not against pharmacology. I'm not against the use of psychiatric medications. When people have clinical anxiety, clinical disorders that are interfering with their life, if a person cannot function day to day, they probably need medication and psychotherapy to get things down to a medium level. But if the goal is to get rid of anxiety completely, if the goal is to live a life free of any distress, then we get into trouble, because that creates the cascade. Invariably, some anxiety will remain. And then people go back to their doctor, the meds aren't working. And then they get another, and then they get a higher dose. And then that doesn't work, because we cannot cure all of anxiety. It's just an emotion. We can get anxiety down to a manageable middle range using pharmacology, using medication, but we cannot get rid of it entirely. And if people have that misperception, well, it creates real issues. Today, unfortunately, even low levels of anxiety are enough to warrant a medical diagnosis. Many practitioners, I would say many PCPs in particular, prescribing medications do so for somebody coming in with any level of anxiety, as opposed to for debilitating levels of anxiety. People have some level of anxiety. They need skills and tools and friends and self-care, 100%. We need to be able to tolerate it. The way I like to think about it is this. Anxiety is on a 0 to 10 scale. Okay? Nobody has a 0. And hopefully no one has a 10. So we're left with 1 to 9. 1, 2, and 3 are low. 4, 5, 6 are medium, and 7, 8, 9 are high. If you have a 7, 8, or 9, you're going to need medication, certainly psychotherapy. A 4, 5, or 6, you might. But a 1, 2, or a 3 is normal. That is part of the human condition. But in many doctors' offices, when you're asked if you have any anxiety, if the answer is even a 1 or a 2, then people will receive a prescription. Beyond medicine, there are thousands, actually tens of thousands of solutions to get rid of anxiety today, like balms and mantras and meditations and all sorts of therapies. And on the one hand, this makes sense because you don't want to have anxiety. It's uncomfortable. But on the other hand, let's be very clear. Physiologically speaking, anxiety is not dangerous in of itself. Our reaction to anxiety is dangerous. Our behavioral responses can be dangerous. Our interpretation that it is always a problem and our judgment of ourselves and what we do in the context of that judgment, that shame, the guilt, the feeling terrible about it, that is dangerous. But the actual feelings are not dangerous. It feels like death when your heart is going a mile a minute and when your breathing is labored and when your stomach is in knots. It feels like death. But physiologically speaking, anxiety will not kill you. I have never had a patient die from high anxiety alone, and none of my colleagues ever had a patient die from high anxiety alone. Often people will come to the emergency room saying they're having a heart attack when it's just a panic attack. And they're sent home, usually with some Ativan. But people don't die because of anxiety. Yet we relentlessly pursue an anxiety-free life. We relentlessly pursue it. And that pursuit, that's increasing our anxiety en masse. At its root, we are obsessed with being in control. In high-income countries, citizens are accustomed to having a sense of control, to predict everything, to be in the know, all of our checks and all of our balances, and all the accoutrements of the modern age. And as a result, we can't handle it when things are out of our control. In low and middle income nations, well, citizens they realize they're not in control. They realize they're not in control not only of their externals, but they realize that there's some degree that their emotions are also unpredictable, and they've made peace with it. Well, we need to do the same. This is my model of anxiety today. Beneath the surface of this beautiful image of a plant growing, there's a seed that either was planted or fell into the ground. And with water and time and some oxygenation, the seed started to rot and it became a mess. And that rotting casing of the seed became the first nutrients which fueled the growth of the plant. The plant ate the seed because it was decayed, because it became putrid and wretched. And this is my model of anxiety today. We need to change our relationship with anxiety. And instead of getting rid of that mess, instead of clearing it out, we need to use it as fuel for growth so we can become ourselves. And when we take this perspective, what we see is that anxiety can do many great things for us. Great things. It can increase your resilience and it can strengthen your connection with others. Perhaps most important of all, it can help you. It can help you to let go of control. Let me show you how. Going to the gym physically, it makes us sweaty and uncomfortable and out of breath, and it even can cause mild pain at times. We feel winded. Why do we do this? Look at this gentleman on the screen. He's sweating, he's heaving, he's working super hard, and he's becoming a beast. He's becoming mentally and physically strong, and that's why he does it. Well, anxiety is the same way. That resistance, the physical resistance, is the same as the mental resistance. Have you ever heard of exposure therapy? Exposure therapy. It's a variant of cognitive behavior therapy, and it involves confronting the anxiety that you experience in order to become more resilient. I'll tell you a story. was a patient I met. Her name was Nicole. We'll call her Nicole. And she had hypochondriasis. She had health anxiety. She thought that she had an aneurysm in her brain, although she did not. And she was terrified that her anxiety would spike and her brain would explode and she would die, which was not going to happen. She had been to neurologists and been cleared. There was no physical risk, but she couldn't shake the thought because of her anxiety. And she started to withdraw from daily activities because she didn't want her anxiety to spike and her brain to go. And we used exposure therapy. She embraced her anxiety by going to a neurology ward, by watching videos about aneurysms, and by doing things beyond her comfort zone, like traveling without a phone, without the ability to contact people. And she overcame her obsessions. And she graduated from therapy. I was so proud of her. She worked extremely hard. And 2 years later, the phone rang. Nicole was pregnant with a baby boy. And in utero, unbelievably, the doctors had detected that that baby had an aneurysm. And I was terrified that Nicole would freak out and she would go back to having hypochondriasis and become debilitated. But she didn't. She found the strength. She found the inner strength because she had been through it before, to tolerate the incredible uncertainty, the incredible adversity, the risk. And her baby was brought into the world and had life-saving surgery and survived. And she did too. She did great. Today, he's a healthy and adorable little kid. But more importantly, Nicole, she's just a rock star. She's a rock star, resilient mom who doesn't let anxiety get in her way or in her kids' way or in her family's way because she pushed against it. And if you want to get rid of your anxiety, you will miss out on this opportunity to use it to build resilience. By doing things that make you anxious, even just once a week, it can transform your level of mental fitness and resilience so you will be able to handle other vicissitudes of life with real grace. Let's talk about relationships and how anxiety can strengthen your connection and your intimacy. There's an irony, a great irony of human relationships. On the one hand, we are social beings and we are infinitely stronger when we feel connected to others. The Harvard study of adult development, Dr. Robert Waldinger, has clearly shown us that the closeness of our relationships at age 50 and 60 is the greatest predictor of a healthy life, a well-being at age 80 and beyond. More than IQ, more than physical health, and much more than socioeconomic status. We thrive when we are connected to others, especially romantic relationships, but any. But on the other hand, in order to create intimate connections, we actually have to be vulnerable. So we're strongest with our connection, but the way to get there requires being vulnerable. Because when you open up to someone, when you share with them your pain and your difficulty, when they hear you and validate you and you feel connected to them as a result, you have used your anxiety, you have used your difficulty and embracing it through vulnerability have actually created more connection and intimacy in your life. We've all done this. If we're terrified of something and we share it with someone and they give us a listening ear. If someone is afraid of something and they open up to us and we take them out for coffee and we put an arm on their shoulder and we say, I'm here for you. That's all it takes, just being human. But the process on our end is admitting and acknowledging vulnerability, acknowledging our anxiety, and being there for others when they do the same. If and when we do this, we create intimacy and connection. I'll add something here. I know people who really are not connected to others. Their relationships are strained. Their relationships are disconnected. They feel anxious and they don't acknowledge it. Some of them can't, unfortunately. Sometimes it's hard to share our anxiety in a way that others will hear and to help others to support us, to choose others who will support us. It's dynamic and it's challenging. But in those cases, especially in those cases, the training, the skill is to learn how to open up to certain people. And when we do so, we can start to thrive in amazing ways. Let's talk about control. Who here likes to lose control, right? No, you don't. No one likes to lose control. But as long as you anticipate it, and as long as you're willing, doesn't it feel really good to let go? To let go? Neurobiologically, anxiety shares the same physiology as excitement. They both involve the fight or flight response. I mentioned adrenaline beforehand. I like roller coasters. When I'm going up a roller coaster and I hear it's going up there, I have this eager anticipation. My stomach starts to drop. My heartbeat starts to rise. My breathing starts to labor. I feel a little bit of tension and I'm so excited for that. Yeah. And I let go. It's the same physiology. It's the same neurobiology as when I feel anxious. But there's only one difference. In the one when I'm feeling anxious, I'm trying to hold on to control. And on the roller coaster, I'm letting go. I'm specifically saying I don't have control. I'm not in the know. And that's okay. And that's okay. Now, there are lots of ways to do this. Action and adventure movies, spontaneous trips, playing competitive games, going to a new restaurant, taking your relationship to the next level. These trigger our adrenaline because they're new and they're exciting and we don't know what's going to happen, but we pursue them anyway. And that's what anxiety teaches us. That's what anxiety is there for. The physiological response is there for us to harness so we can let go, not so it can control us. And when we accept that, well, life is a completely different dimension. I want to make this very practical as we round out our conversation today. I want to give you 4 steps to use anxiety to thrive in your life. Practically, tactically, 1, 2, 3, and 4. What can you do today to implement some of these ideas that we've talked about? To learn to use anxiety to thrive in your relationship with yourself, in your relationship with others, in your life in general. Now, of course, when people have clinical anxiety, these 4 steps are not enough. If anxiety is debilitating, if it's getting in the way of your life, please don't just use this approach. Get psychotherapy, maybe get medication, do what you need in order to get your anxiety to a mid-range where you can deal with it and it's not debilitating. If it's uncomfortable, not debilitating, that's okay. Then you can use these steps. Ready? Here are the 4 steps. Identify, share, embrace, and let go. Identify, share, embrace, and let go. Let's go through each one. Identify. In our culture, which is so terrified of anxiety, we don't like to think about what makes us anxious. We put it out of our mind. We think about anything else. We distract ourselves with our phones. We do anything and everything we can to not think about that which is making our heart rate increase, which is making our breathing more rapid. Please stop. Take a minute and think about what is making you anxious. Take a couple minutes. Take half an hour. Take an hour. Go for a walk. And just think it through. Just think it through. Understand that anxiety is something we have to give some thought to. We have to give it some thought, some inner work before we can use it in other ways to thrive. Number 2, share. Once you've identified what you're afraid of, talk to someone about it. By the way, if you're having trouble talking to someone about their anxiety and getting them to hear you, it's probably because you haven't really felt it. If you have something on your mind that really feels anxious and you convey that emotion in the moment, usually that'll get other people's attention. Not always, but usually. So just a little tip over there. Once you've identified, really gone to the depth of it, share it with someone else, with a coworker or a friend, or talk to a therapist. If you're not ready to have a conversation, that's fine. Put it into an email, but share it in another way. Get it off your mind and share it with someone who will validate you and who will understand it. But taking that leap and being vulnerable, that's how we cultivate connection and relationships with others. Step 3, embrace. Remember, Nicole, you do it too. There are many situations in your life where you have embraced anxiety. You've done something that makes you anxious, even though it makes you anxious because you knew it was something you wanted to do, because it was something you needed to do. And you became stronger as a result. Just keep doing that same thing. Our worlds have become so small, especially for young people today, with the distraction of technology, of video games, of social media. The world has become very small. We need to get out of that virtual world and into our lives, embracing the anxiety and the challenges that come with the real world. Embrace it. Do things that make you feel anxious. Let your anxiety ride and do it anyway, at least once a week. Like I said before, do something that makes you feel anxious. It's kind of like going to the gym. And finally, let go. You're human. We're human. We can't predict everything. We can't control everything. We can't know everything. And when we accept that, our true essence can actually come out. Then we can learn how to dream and do what we really can do in this world, which is limited, but it's something great. But only when we let go. Only when we let go of that which we cannot change. So I'm very excited to share this with you today, these 4 steps. And for those who want to learn more, you are welcome to scan this QR code and to check out to join a wait list for a workshop. It's a workshop that I've delivered a couple times in the past, and we're going to be doing another round of it. So please get in touch with me. Either way, this is to my website, and I'd love to hear from you. You can also join the wait list for the workshop by texting anxiety to 66866. You can send that from your phone, SMS anytime from an American or Canadian carrier. And again, either way, I'd just love to hear from people what you're thinking about this, how this is resonating with you. And also another thing, I would love to get your feedback on today's talk. This is another QR code, and I ask you to please scan it, or you can go to that URL, and when prompted, you can put in the code word library to give me feedback in order that I can improve these talks and also to be able to just deliver this material, because we are living in a very anxious time, primarily because of our response to anxiety, because of our perspective on anxiety. We've seeing it as something pathological as opposed to part of the human condition. And yes, it can be clinical, but not always. Once we embrace that, and once we come back to being human and accepting the anxiety and stress that is part of the human condition, we can use it to become more aware, to connect with others, to pursue our dreams with renewed strength and vigor and connection. And I truly hope this was helpful to you. Now for the best part of all is your questions and our discussion. Brandon, I would love to hear what people are saying in the chat and what they've submitted in advance. So fire away. Let's have
let's start. Thank you so much, by the way. What a wonderful presentation. I want to start with Anne's question. Anne says, I love thinking of anxiety this way, but how can I tell when anxiety is pointing me towards something meaningful versus just mental noise? It's not all meaningful, is it?
Great question. That's a really good question, Anne. Please get in touch with me, because I would love to hear more about your journey. It sounds like you've really given this a lot of thought. it is all meaningful in that when we probe our anxiety, it can show us what we're afraid of and what our values are. I'll give you an example. I grew up, I'll talk about myself personally. Financial anxiety really gets to me. It's an Achilles for me. And I grew up, my father was an accountant by training and an entrepreneur by profession. And when I decided to go into clinical psychology in the helping profession, it was a real challenge for me, because would I be leaving behind the business world and looking at something which was substantially less profitable, and as an author and as a speaker, and that was a real challenge for me. But I had to face that anxiety and bring it out. And once I recognized that and was able to deal with it, it became a point of connection with my father, and with my wife, with my family, with my clients. And once I was able to deal with that and go through the mental resilience of facing it and pursuing my dream despite my anxiety, it opened up new vistas. So that's just my personal story. But I do think it always has meaning when we go through these 4 steps. If we identify what it is and share it with others, embrace it, and then learn how to let go of what we can't control, there's so much depth and meaning there, and a great journey that we can all go move towards. So that's been my experience anyway. I hope that's helpful.
Okay. Yeah. So you saying that you have like financial anxiety. Sam is asking a similar question, but kind of reconciling 2 contradictions. Sam says, your comment saying that in moderate income areas, the cause of problems is that we are trying to erase anxiety. I'm seeing the opposite in society today. Anxiety is being used as an excuse sometimes. Specifically, my young adult child seems to be getting worse since seeing a therapist. They're treating anxiety as a disease. How do you reconcile the 2 contradictions?
I think that's exactly it. When we view anxiety as a disease and something that we have to give into all the time, that's specifically what makes things worse. I do think we are overdiagnosing. I do think we are over-medicating. I do think we are treating all forms of distress and strain as a disease as opposed to a part of the human condition. And I think young adults are struggling the most. This is exactly the cultural piece that we have to change. In middle-income countries, that's not the case. It's understood that it's going to be difficult, and well, you got to get your cart out and go and sell your wares, and you have to go to work because otherwise you're not going to eat, and you have to do what you got to do, and that's part of life. So people are actually able to tolerate the challenges of real life much more than they are. One of my colleagues has a very funny word for this. He calls it affluenza. His name's Dr. David Palkovitz in New York. Affluenza, right? The more wealthy, affluent people are, the more they're likely to struggle with these mental health concerns. So what you're saying and I'm saying is exactly the same. And thank you for your comments.
Okay. We do have quite a few questions about children and teens and students. So I'm going to combine a couple of them since they're kind of similar. Danielle is saying, as a teacher, how do I help my students thrive with anxiety? Likewise, Edna says, any pointers to help teenagers deal with high pressures of school?
Great. I love speaking to teachers and doing workshops for educational organizations because teachers get it. You're dealing with this day to day, and you see the challenge that kids, young adults, and children and teens are facing today. I would encourage your students to voluntarily, to willingly, to want to do things that make them anxious. Just like people get fired up about going to the gym to build physical muscles, we need to get fired up and fire up our kids about doing things that make them mentally resilient and mentally more connected.
Great.
So if I have one tip, I wish every school in America would have not only physical education, but a mental education, and mental education specifically that we would provide opportunities for kids to do one thing every week that makes them face their anxiety. The whole country would be different.
That's really interesting, especially when you think of it in the context of Tanya's question. She says she has guilt that she made her child anxious. So kind of like getting that out once a week and then going home to an anxious parent. She says, how does an anxious parent an anxious child?
Tanya, you did not make your kid anxious. They're growing up surrounded by, in the context of major technology companies that, your kids probably have smartphones and they're probably on them all the time. And they're being encouraged literally through apps every single minute to get out of their lives and into their phones. I hope that you've seen Jonathan Haidt's seminal and very important work, The Anxious Generation, where he shows a causal effect between technology use and anxiety. And parents in the modern era, we did not start the fire, as Billy Joel once famously said. This is not something that we started. There is a lot we can do to make it a little bit better, but please don't blame yourself. And if you want to share more of your journey with me, and I would love to hear it.
Great. Jean says, and I think you addressed this, in the presentation a bit, but are medications necessary for dealing with anxiety, or is it just a matter of recognizing it, dealing with it in more organic or behavioral ways, such as exercising or turning off the news or something like that?
Great question. So I tried to address this during my talk, but I'll see if I can just eke out a couple more sound bites. If anxiety is interfering with your life, using medication to get it to a middle range where you can function day to day and then learn to deal with and face the rest to create closer connection, more insight into yourself, and more resilience, then that to me is the recipe. That to me is the pathway. If you can function day to day with your high anxiety, you might not need it. Now, I'll just talk about myself personally. I've been blessed not to use anxiety medications because I've been doing this for 20 years and I know these skills. Last year, 2 years ago, I had some major financial anxiety actually, and it took my anxiety up to a 7, maybe even an 8 out of 10. And I thought to myself, you know what, David, you might have to actually use some medications to be able to do this. But I used my skills, having written a book on it and spent 2.5 decades studying, focusing on this, dealing with it, and having, thank God, an amazingly supportive wife and community and spiritual mentors. So I was very well equipped. But if I didn't have that practice, there's no question that I personally would have taken medications at that time in my life to get it down to a 4 or a 5 or maybe a 6, and then to be able to deal with the rest. But for most people, if you're at a 7, 8, or 9, yeah, you're going to need something.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about those people who've felt anxiety their whole life. And so as it steadily grows, how do you give yourself a number of 7, 8, or 9 when you think, oh, it's just something harder that I have to get over and then it'll go away?
That's part of the identify. Once we actually sit and think about our anxiety, we realize that there are gradations. If you don't like the 1 through 9, just use high, medium, and low. Okay. And ask yourself right now, is your anxiety high, medium, or low? Personally, I'm in Las Vegas today, as you can probably tell from the background, and I'm giving a talk at an HR conference. It's new territory for me. I haven't done a lot of corporate speaking, so I'm a little bit anxious today. I would say I'm in like a low medium range, like around a 4. But that's very normal and I think very healthy given the fact of where I am and what I have up today. So ask yourself the same question: high, medium, or low? Where are you at? Brandon, where are you at today?
I would say low to medium. Okay. In this current moment, yes, low to medium.
Okay. That's a very healthy place to be, because it's easier to metabolize lower levels of anxiety. Higher levels are just harder to use, but once you have the skills, you could use them too. It's just, you need more skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Matt is saying, is there a connection between anxiety and ADHD?
Great question. A lot of parents ask this question today. The brief answer is yes. Firstly, almost every kid these days is diagnosed with some form of ADHD. So that's a different discussion in of itself. But anxiety can certainly interfere with attention and also hyperactivity. Often rambunctious kids who, especially if they're being aggressive, have a lot of anxiety, but they're not talking about their anxiety. They're acting aggressively. They don't want to talk about their anxiety. They're not identifying it, and they're not sharing it. And they're certainly not embracing it. So instead, they'll act out. In fact, we have a word for this. It's called the fight or flight response, right? Fight or flight response. So that aggression that we often see in ADHD, and this obviously goes beyond today's presentation, can definitely be mediated by anxiety. And the same thing with inattention and difficulty shifting focus. When people are anxious, it's kind of like you load up the random access memory in your phone by having extra apps. So imagine having an anxiety app alongside 3 or 4 other things. You have to shift and toggle between those 2 things. It's going to slow down your processing speed. So those are a couple of sound bites around ADHD and anxiety. I have a lot more to share on that, but goes beyond today.
Yeah. Okay. Corey is wondering about the relationship between control and anxiety.
Yes.
Corey says, were you saying that exposure to things that cause adrenaline rushes will help lessen your anxiety, or just give you tools to help you lessen your anxiety?
Great question. Corey, you definitely figured out what I was trying to say. It's really both. When we are out of control and we accept that, it creates an opportunity to develop our humility, our virtues, our leaning into it and accepting lack of control. And in of itself, it helps us to deal with anxiety. So really the answer to your question is both. That's, to me, the deepest tool. And it's one that I myself struggle with, how to actually let go. I think we all do in some regards, but it is so powerful. It's such a powerful approach. And when we do so, it opens up creativity and new ideas and new vistas for our lives, because we're not getting bogged down in that which we can't control. We're really focusing on the very little that we can.
Great. Thank you. Aditi says, how do you deal with others when they want you to change your behavior in an attempt to control their own anxiety?
Oh, yes. Dealing with others. I have a whole section in my workshop about this. Here, I'll just go back to that slide. The 4-part, the workshop is focused on identify and then share, embrace, and let go. The share part, the share module, is about interpersonal development in anxiety and how we deal with other people's anxiety and our own when others want us to change. Briefly, if you can share that they're pestering you makes you anxious, if they're going to hear it, great. If they're not going to hear it, then that's probably a couples therapy or a relationship therapy, or at least an individual therapy kind of situation. But it's great you're asking the right question. And without more information, I don't know the answer, but it's something in that general direction.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one last question. Let's see. Sure. Virginia from Upper Dublin Library says, as I age, my anxiety seems to be increasing. Any tip for seniors? But likewise, Sheila would like to know how to address anxiety when being the caregiver of their senior parent.
Yes. Both of you, thank you for your questions. The best advice I have, especially for older adults, is to connect with others in a real emotional, vulnerable way to the best that you can. For caregivers, talk to other caregivers. It's often hard to sort of talk about the stress of caregiving with the person you're giving care to. That wouldn't be caregiving, but you need support. And that means speaking to other people who are in the sandwich generation of taking care of kids and parents, or other people who are in caregiving responsibilities and roles. And for older adults, connect with others. We need others. This is the magic of anxiety in many ways. The primary magic of anxiety is how it can create a human connection when we use it in the right way. Although, of course, it can do other things for us as well, as I've tried to share.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today. What an incredible hour. I know I learned so much. Everybody should definitely pick up your book and check out your workshops. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. What an awesome hour. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Yes, I want to extend that huge thank you to all of our audience members for joining us today. Without your support, none of this would be possible. So we thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. Below the live stream video in the resources area, you can find the link to the book I was talking about. And maybe, Dr. Rosmarin, you can send me the links for your workshop as well. And I can get that in the resources area.
I'd be happy to.
We look forward to everyone joining us on May 14th for an evening of thrill and mystery when we chat with author Leanne Zhang about her book, Julie Chan is Dead. And again on May 21st when we talk to bestselling author Rochelle Bergstein about her book, The Genius of Judy Blume. Be sure to register for these and lots of other great events on your library's event page. I am Brandon Adler, and thank you for joining us.